guys, welcome back to another week on Stats Chat. Last week, of course, we all got excited about the Dragons and Mammoth leaks. And now every content creator has kind of had their video out talking about it. So that's definitely we've ridden that excitement out. I think that kind of the conversation around it is starting to die back down. And we can get back to something a bit more normal. Get back to the topic which actually I had completely intended to do last week before we all got a bit too excited. So, what I'd always intended to talk about was community. While I was away, taking some time away from developing and also taking some time away from doing these videos, I was having a lot of thoughts about the community around the game. Of course, I'm talking mostly about the large Facebook group, the big Discord group, but there are many, many smaller communities, be they regional, kind of country-based Facebook groups or Discords. There are different language communities. There is, of course, a very, very strong French community. And how important they are for us as players, but also for the game. I think it's incredibly important that these communities exist. I think that this game will last, will exist, will continue to be supported as long as there is a strong community. And when there is no community, when the conversation goes dead, that's when we kind of start to know that the game is on a ticking clock, shall we say. So I think that it's incredibly important that these exist, and it's a really big shout out for a start to Simon Swan and the other moderators and admins of the Facebook group, the creators of these kind of groups. And it's very much not an easy task. We've seen just this week that there has been a small amount of controversy over, a post which became something of a running joke, and then people being offended by some of the comments, and then other people being offended effectively by the fact that other people are offended. All these things that happen on the internet, but don't happen in reality at all. They're very, very difficult to navigate, and it's a very skillful process to create a large positive community around the game. And I think that definitely exists on Facebook, very much so. I love the Facebook group. It's one of the best Facebook groups that I'm a part of. I hate Facebook as a website, but, we can't do anything about that. The Discord is a little bit different. I find I'm not a fan of the anonymity that Discord gives. I'm much more positive about these smaller groups, particularly kind of like ones that are built around tournaments that are running, and kind of like communities in that kind of way where people know who each other are. And I'm not a big fan of some of the very, very vocal people on the Discord who kind of do so behind this shield of nobody really knowing who they are. And kind of I feel like they dominate the group in not a positive way. But that in itself is very interesting about how difficult it can be to create a positive, welcoming environment. So, the question that was on my mind a lot was, is A Song of Ice and Fire Stats a community? If it is, then what can it do to become a stronger community? What does that community want? What can I do to help strengthen the game? And if it's not, then should it be a community? Does it want to be a community? And is that a good thing? Of course, they're all difficult questions, and, there's no one single answer. While I was away, I stayed in contact with the game through these places, but, even though I wasn't doing any development, anything to do with the site in that kind of way, personally, I still go on the site every single day, on my phone. I like to look at these things. I built this website because I like it. I like everything about it, pretty much. Some things I changed the way it works because lots of people want it to work that way. It's not how I want it to work, but that's a totally different thing. It's never going to be exactly what I originally imagined. But point is that I love to look at the tournament results, keep up to date with the big thing that's going on. I I'm pretty obsessed, shall we say, with the power rankings, looking at them both in terms of players. I like to see what big players, when they go up and down. I like to see who they've beaten, who they've lost to, these kind of things. But also the factions, looking at where they're moving, what kind of things are happening, where the trends are there. Makes me kind of think again about some commanders, makes me go and check things out. So that's like why the site even exists in the first place, which is I built it for me. But these days I have almost completely built everything that I originally imagined the site could do. And now we're very much in a case of like, well, what do you want it to do? And so the question is kind of, what can I do to help the site grow? But more importantly, like, what can I do to help the game continue to grow? What can I do to help your local community grow? This has been on my mind a lot because you might be surprised to find out that actually I play in a very, very small gaming group. I mean, in the last 8-9 months, I've only actually played against 2 other people in person. My gaming group is a little bit bigger than that, but not that much bigger. But, half of them basically barely ever turn up outside of lockdown. Even before COVID, they hardly ever came. And, it really aren't that many players that I play with. It's very much been on my mind, what can I do to help grow that? But right now, particularly in my local area, I'm back to almost stage 1, kind of absolutely don't go outside kind of lockdown again. What can you do? Probably going to last for like the next 3 months or something like that, right through the winter here in the UK, in the Northeast. So in reality, growing my local community, my local gaming group is impossible. That's not going to happen. But it's still on my mind. What kind of things could I do once the lockdown is eased? What kind of things are people doing? How can the site help communities grow? How can the site be more appealing to kind of like gaming stores, gaming clubs, as opposed to individuals? Because that's where the game exists. That is the game. Of course, the site has been very successful and has grown and helped create the TTS community. And the site will always be very strong on TTS, I hope. Because of its export features, and because you really need a site like this to be able to organize TTS games, to organize TTS tournaments. But you don't necessarily need the website to play a game in person. It becomes a nice thing to have then, rather than something that really, really improves your game, really, really makes things easy for you, really kind of makes it possible that it happens at all, kind of on the international scale that we've basically managed to achieve, which is kind of where its success and popularity has been. So the question is, what would make you want to use the site more? What features could I add? And what kind of features would also help bring people that you know and play with who don't use the website? What would bring them to the site? If you have any ideas, then of course there are many ways that you can get into contact with me. You can put comments in this video. There's, the Facebook group, A Song of Ice and Fire Stats, where we post some stuff and keep people updated with. You can send me an email. You can send me messages through Discord. People get into contact with me with loads of ways. There's a whole contact us button on A Song of Ice and Fire Stats. So, if you have any ideas, of course, don't hesitate to send me a message. If you have any problems with the site, don't hesitate to send me messages. But really, what is the next move for A Song of Ice and Fire Stats? Because stats-wise, it's achieved most of what it set out to achieve. Not at all, it's achieved everything that can be achieved. There is still plenty of stuff that can happen there. But we have enough stats to be very, very confident in the number of results and kind of what they say, at least about the very, very strong commanders. The site and the system is very, very good at predicting the best commanders. It's not so great at predicting the worst, partly because the very worst commanders almost never get used, so they have very, very little data. So, that's a self-repeating cycle. More submissions should improve that, but it's, even when we get more submissions, they still just tend to gravitate towards these same commanders. So, on that point, we get roughly about 200 submissions per week, which is been steady over the past few months. Of course, when you think about that, tournaments are a very, very large part of what Song of Ice and Fire Stats is in kind of the data that it collects. And tournaments have been very, very successful, and I'm sure you've seen, the regular users of the site will have seen that there have been some improvements to the tournaments recently. But even when you think about something like the TSL, the biggest tournament running on the site at the moment, a TTS event like that, it has 72 players. Big event. That's 36 results per week. That's the biggest tournament running on the site right now. And yet we get easily 7 times that many results. So both a huge number of tournaments are being run because they easily represent about 100 of the 200 results per week. But also you have to see that, again, half of all those results come from non-tournament data. That is, of course, why we accept non-tournament data, and why it's really useful and important for you to submit that. If players don't want to look at that data when they look at the kind of stats for the different commanders, the factions, all that stuff, they can be removed easily enough. But that we accept them, that we collect them, is very important to the site and how many kind of submissions it has. Particularly, again, for these less used commanders. They're so rarely used in tournaments that we have nothing to go by. So, like I say, tournaments are a very important part of that, and we do a lot of work on the tournaments. I'm always trying to make tournaments as good as possible. At this point, I don't particularly know why you would not run your tournament through a Song of Ice and Fire Stats. If you've got events and you're not running them through a Song of Ice and Fire Stats for any particular reason, then let me know why. Like, if the tournaments don't do what you want them and need them to do, then I can modify them. But really, we can help promote your events. We can help promote your community. We can bring it the exposure it wants. And also, it will help your players become more involved in the game. And it will help improve their gameplay if they start to use the site more. So I just think that you can help the site, you can help the community, and the site can help you. So all I would say is, if you have anything that stops you, let me know what that thing is, and I'll try and remove it. Be it it's too complicated, I don't understand how it works, or something like that. I'm always trying to remove these barriers. If we remember back to what the site was, just like 2 months ago, 4 months ago, 6 months ago, like, the site continuously changes, continuously improves to be what people want it to be. So don't hesitate to tell me what you think could be better. I won't always do exactly what you want, because there are a lot of different people who want different things. I have to try and judge what the majority want, what will bring more people to the site, what will be best for everybody, and also, like I say, the things that I'm sort of interested in or I think are useful. But very much so, I run tournaments through the site. I use the site almost every day. Not just kind of like try and develop it. I use it as a person who's interested in what's going on, interested in the stats. So I'm always clicking around, looking at things and thinking, oh, that would be easier if it's here, that would be better, that could be better, and then I try and make it. But I love to hear from you. Tell me what you want to know to make things better. So that's enough about kind of like ideas and all that kind of stuff. The site is in continuous development, as I say. Always check back for more stuff. Let me know what you would like. There are tons of ways to get into contact with me. There is a load of information on the site about how to do that. But I'm on Discord. There's an email there and all that kind of stuff. Let's dive into some stats, because we do call ourselves Stats Chat, and have a look at the kind of things that have been going on in the game, because it has been a long time since we kind of looked at that kind of stuff. So the interesting development relatively recently is that the Starks have basically become equal with the Free Folk. They've gone up and down a few times, but what's more significant is that Night's Watch have kind of clawed their way from this 5th position where they were like negatively rated and a little bit off the pack of what was being kind of called the most competitive 4 factions in the game right now, which were, of course, Free Folk, Starks, Lannisters, and Baratheons, and the Night's Watch have now joined that to be 5 factions all in there. What's interesting is that Baratheons have slipped to 5th at the same time. They're effectively almost 0 ranked again, very much like just balanced. But balanced isn't great, considering that Targaryens are considered very much not balanced. So if Targaryens are incredibly weak, then if you're balanced, then you're probably a little bit below the power level. Because just by the existence of Targaryens being so weak, everybody else should be a little bit more powerful, a little bit above 0. But we see the Baratheons slipping down, and yet at the same time, we have had not 1 but 2 lots of Baratheons entering the Hall of Champions. The first entry is, of course, by Viper, the number 1 ranked player in TTS, in Skirmish at the Twins. It is interesting to say that he won the tournament with Baratheons. It's more interesting to say that Baratheons came number 1, 2, and 3 in that event. And all of those lists ran Courtney Penrose. His list was Courtney Penrose twice. The player who came second, I'm pretty sure off the top of my head, was Courtney Penrose twice. The player who came third was Courtney Penrose once, who played Courtney Penrose in the vast majority of their games. This basically says, at this competition, let's point out one important part about this competition. It was a 30-point event. In this event, Courtney Penrose seemed to absolutely dominate the Baratheon faction. We skip ahead to a smaller physical event in Australia, just a 7-player event. Okay, so, it's not huge. Anything could win in a small local game, but it's not unknown player. It's not an unknown gaming group. We are, of course, talking about Mickster of Northern Front. Got a YouTube channel, big tournament organizer himself. So we are talking about players who are playing competitively, not just like a random set of 5 people in the middle of nowhere. And he has won a 40-point tournament with Courtney Penrose twice. This tells us that Courtney is just absolutely the number 1 right now. I think that Stannis is still lacking the Lightbringers. I think they bring a lot to that side of the faction. But what's interesting is that Courtney, as the NCU choice on the Renly side, is just so powerful. And we know that that is true of all NCU commanders in general in every faction, but it seems even more so in the Baratheons at the moment. So I think play Courtney. It's as simple as that. Right now, I had hoped that I would be going to a tournament in just a couple of days up in Scotland, and I had planned to take Baratheons. I had planned to take Courtney Penrose in 1 list, not 2. I do think that there are still lists that can go alongside him that play into specific matchups, specific game modes. I was tailoring a list that went alongside it into very, very specific things. I might as well tell you, since I won't be going, I was effectively writing a Renly charismatic air list that could play and could hopefully beat Free Folk in a Clash of Kings. I effectively looked at the tournament entries and I decided that that was the worst possible thing that could happen to me, and that I would play Courtney Penrose into almost every game mode except that one. And so I think that that is a part of the way this game plays. But right now, that's where Baratheons are at for me, personally. It's like, this is your Courtney Penrose list, and unless you have this absolute burning reason not to, you should be playing him. You should basically be building your second list to take on a very specific thing. And even when you build it for that very specific thing, you probably might pick Courtney anyway, which is how we end up with these double Courtneys. He is more dominant of the Baratheon faction right now than Harmer is of the Free Folk, than Rob is of or Howland, because basically the pair of them are equally dominant of the Stark faction. And Lannisters are spoiled for choice. They have 3 powerful commanders right now. They've got High Sparrow, they've got Tyrion, they've got Joffrey. So it seems that Baratheons are Courtney, and I think that is an issue for game balance at the moment. Whether or not new releases will help that could be a thing, but I don't see any releases coming on the Renly side which are going to change that for the Renly side of the loyalty. So unless something comes along that gives Stannis a big power bump, gives that side of the faction a real use, then Courtney's going to be your number 1 guy. But will Courtney survive the release of dragons and mammoths? Because it looks like the Renly side of the faction do not have any real answers for that. So maybe we're always talking about what's about right now. That's what the stats looks at. It looks at the current state of the game. We're never making predictions about what will happen in the future. That's what players do. And normally they're wildly wrong. But we will see. We'll see where things lie for Courtney after the next set of releases. But I don't think that the Baratheons internally are in a brilliant place. The Night's Watch, as the other powerful faction, the other faction that is worth discussing on a competitive level, are interesting in that they have no one standout commander. They seem to be, if anything, they have too much internal balance. They don't have any particular commander who is an obvious choice for tournaments. Still, people say, oh, Jon is brilliant. Okay, but nothing is backing it up. Nobody is doing exceptionally well with him. There has been a small Spanish tournament. The most recent entry into the Hall of Champions is a Jon Offal pairing for the Night's Watch. This is the second time Night's Watch have ever entered the Hall of Champions after Bombs 27, which is of course Bob from Gamers Haven. That was a 10-player event, and that was a Jon Alistair pairing. So Jon could be considered a consistent theme there, and yet we don't see his ranking being anything worth talking about. But all I would say is right now, the Hall of Champions is looking far more diverse than it used to look. We've even had Lannister winners without the mountain that rides. Whoa. Mind blown. We've had more with, of course, continuously when he's used. He practically wins the tournament, but lots of people think that we should stop talking about that. It's old news. Anyway, if you go ahead and look at this Hall of Champions right now, it is a positive outlook for the game balance. If you look at the power rankings, it has very positive things to say about the game balance in general, with 5 of the 7 factions all being within shouting distance of each other. We've seen Starks go ahead of Free Folk for the first time in forever, an actual change at the top. And so, things do look like they're in a good enough place for those 5. I cannot say the same for neutrals. I cannot say the same for Targaryens yet. We all know that big things are coming for Targs. Neutrals still sat where they are. While I was away, I did get a question asked, and it's not the first time that the question has been asked, or at least not in this exact way, but it's kind of a question that comes up now and again, and it is, of course, about the way the Elo ratings work. This specifically, the question was, with the Free Folk being ranked number 1 continuously, they actually aren't anymore, but that's beside the point. It doesn't mean that the question and the understanding behind it isn't very important. With the Free Folk being ranked number 1, why do they not have a commander ranked in the top 5 commanders? It is not a simple answer. It's not easy, but it did make me aware that, you know, the ELO system is not as well understood as I would like it to be. So I have made some changes to the site. You may have seen there is now a new page called Power Rankings, and this replaces the previous faction and commander rankings. Previously, we showed the faction rankings, and these, of course, are the factions rated from top to bottom and kind of represent their win ratios each. The commander rankings, shown in the same way, are not actually created in exactly the same way, and that's why I've changed the way they're shown now. The commander rankings, of course, for a particular faction actually more represent the internal balance within that faction, how strong some commanders are by comparison to others within that faction. When you play a game with a particular commander, we add the faction's rating to the commander's rating, and that's how we get our actual kind of modifier to your personal rating when we work out how likely you are to win a game. That, of course, means that really what I've decided to show you now is the Commander Elo rankings that you see on the Power Rankings page is the sum of those two values. It previously wasn't. Now it actually is. You can see exactly the number that gets applied to your game and your ranking when you play a game. This, of course, means that the free folk commanders playing for a very high-rated faction now have a higher score. It doesn't actually put any of them in the top 5, which is still an interesting concept. Rob and Howland are currently sat in number 1 and 2 with very, very high ratings as incredibly high-rated Stark commanders inside a faction which is very highly rated itself. But what makes Rob and Howland so highly rated is that there are other commanders within the Stark faction which are significantly worse rated than they themselves are as commanders. What this means is that the internal balance within the faction is not brilliant. There is a huge gap between how powerful Rob and Howland are to how powerful Ed and like Ramsey is there as one of the more powerful Stark commanders, and like how negatively ranked some of the more popular Stark commanders are. This is because we again and again see Rob and Howland do much, much better than these other commanders inside of the Starks. This forces Rob and Howland's rating up and forces the rating of the other commanders down and keeps the Stark faction relatively, shall we say, balanced. Balanced isn't the right word. Keeps them from, as a faction, becoming massively highly ranked. So, Free Folk, on the other hand, actually, they have less commanders for a start because they don't have the neutral commanders. Though neutral commanders are generally not that highly played anyway, so it's not a huge difference. But the Free Folk, interestingly, actually have a much closer packed set of commanders. This says that those commanders are far more balanced internally than the Stark commanders. Or the Lannisters, or the Baratheons, or, the Night's Watch actually do very well for internal balance too. But the Free Folk are very equally balanced inside the faction. But they, as a whole, all of them are doing well, which is why the faction is generally the highest ranked faction in the game. They've actually, as we say, just lost the lead to the Starks recently. If you're asking yourself, though, what is the singular most powerful tournament build I can create? It's probably far more well represented, shall we say. It's probably far more applicable to look at the Commander ELO rankings. If you want to know what wins tournaments the most, it's probably Rob and Howland. What wins tournaments the most after that? It's probably a High Sparrow combined with Joffrey or Tyrion Lannister list. That's why we see Rob Howland, High Sparrow, Joffrey, Tyrion. We then see Courtney Penrose coming in at 6, and that's because he alone can win Baratheon tournaments. Then we see a clumping of free folk commanders who all get to see some popular play. Harmer, of course, is in there, but actually, crazily enough, is not currently the top ranked free folk commander. And then we start to see ourselves all these other commanders who have some use, they do well, but they're not necessarily the ones winning the events. If you are interested in like how this all gets calculated, what the site thinks your chances of winning are, I created this new thing called the Match Predictor. This will show you how likely the site thinks you are to win any given game. If you put your own, you can look at just factional matchups. You can look at commanders within that faction. You can add players into that, and it will do all the calculations and show you what its percentage win chance is. This is the identical calculation that the site does when you submit a game, and how it works out how many points to give you, to give the faction, give the commander, how likely an unlikely event it is. Of course, the less likely you are to win, according to the site, the more you're going to gain. So really, you want to be looking and not trying to play commanders and games and things like that the site already thinks you're going to win, because that doesn't gain you very much. But the site Match Predictor is just there for people to have a look at, kind of help understand the system a bit more. In general, I would say the faction ELO rankings, the best layman's terms to put it in for me would be the faction ELO rankings represent how strong the faction is as a whole, but really it represents the strength of the units that it can field and the general way the army is played. It represents its tactics deck, it represents its units, it represents those kind of things. The commander ELO rankings are a much more accurate representation in my mind of, particularly at the top of this result, how good a singular set of lists, how good a tournament list can you build with any given faction, with any given commander. And that's where we see our real kind of like names that we see a lot winning the events. This is where we see all of these commanders that exist inside of the Hall of Champions with some regularity. So hopefully that little explanation helps you understand a little bit more, helps you kind of know what the site is doing, because I know some people out there are interested in that kind of stuff. Maybe the people who watch this video, but not everybody. Some people just like to kind of hear what's going on in the game in general. But yes, when we're talking about balance, faction balance and commander balance are two separate things. And I personally think that we should be looking very closely at the commander ELO more, shall we say, than the faction ELO. The faction ELO represents whether or not a tactics deck or a unit should be balanced. A commander ELO really represents whether or not the commanders need rebalancing, but they have shown that they're not that willing to rebalance commanders in terms of their cards, which means that all we get left with is like their attachment abilities or their influence abilities or whatever other things they have outside of their tactics cards. So there's not loads of room there. And hopefully at some point they will be willing to retackle their tactics cards, because where we see the big imbalances in the game, particularly inside factions, is in the commanders themselves.